Good evening. I'm Eric Nelson, a member of the Unitarian Universalist Community Church in Portage, Michigan. And I thought to start our conversation tonight, I'd offer a reading from Derek Walcott titled Love After Love. Love After Love by Derek Walcott. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself, give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you may have ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. So this is the beginning of our programming for this year, and I'm excited to launch what we're calling for our program this year, Living from the Heart, and we're beginning that with Dr. Roger Walsh tonight. I'm excited to engage in our dialogue tonight with Roger, a renowned psychiatrist, spiritual practitioner, and author of several books, including Paths Beyond Ego, Essential Spirituality, which we'll talk about a bit tonight, and his new book, The World of Shamanism, second edition. Tonight, we will explore the common spiritual practices embodied in all the world's great spiritual traditions. Dr. Walsh his work reveals that Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and Taoism each embody 7 core practices that include kindness, love, joy, peace, vision, wisdom, and generosity, and that they point towards universal spiritual truths. In this session, Dr. Walsh will illuminate how these principles can help us navigate personal and global challenges, enrich our life of joy and awakening. To begin our dialogue tonight, I want to express my deep gratitude and appreciation for Dr. Walsh for spending his evening and sharing his lifelong study and practice of the world's spiritual traditions with us. I first met Dr. Walsh in the 1990s through my work as a program officer at the Fetzer Institute in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Dr. Walsh was always generous in sharing his knowledge and insights, and I'm excited to reconnect tonight with Roger after probably 15 years last time I saw you face to face. So welcome, Dr. Walsh.
Well, thanks so much, Eric. And yes, it probably has been 15 years. How did that happen?
Yeah, maybe. I don't want to think. It's been a while, just yesterday. Well, I thought maybe we could start this evening. I've used this word, essential spirituality, which is the title of a book that I think I mentioned in some of the emails to you that I'm going to be using throughout this coming year. I have a mindful living class that'll be starting in October, and we'll meet on Zoom twice a month. And I'll be using your book as a guide. I've used your book several times in my meditation classes at a retirement village that I teach at, and it's been extremely well received. But essential spirituality, that may need some framing and some defining. I thought maybe we could start there and then get into our conversation.
Well, let's see. I hope essential spirituality speaks to the essence of the topic, which is the common practices found and common ideals, virtues, qualities of heart and mind that are found across the world's traditions, and as well as practices to cultivate them. And I should say that the actual title came from my wife, who was just great at coming up with book titles. So I told her what I was doing, and she came up with the title. I was like, that's perfect. Thank you. It's a nice double entendre. It's the essential, the essence, virtues and practices and qualities of heart and mind, and they are essential. Each of the great traditions says each of these 7 qualities of heart and mind is essential for anyone who'd live fully and well and awaken to our true nature. So it's a good title, but I can't take credit for
Now, why spirituality as opposed to essential religion?
it. Well, let's see. Of course, the two terms religion and spirituality are used in a variety of ways, but there's fairly widely shared agreement that they do have different connotations, and that spirituality tends to refer more to direct experience, and particularly experience of the sacred, that is, which is of most value and centrality to our lives and meaning and purpose. Religion has a broader connotation, suggesting that yes, it refers to spirituality, but it also tends to refer to the organizations and institutions and belief systems, etc., that have crystallized around spiritual experiences, both to express them and explain them, and to hopefully induce them.
Just wondering, kind of to introduce yourself and your journey, your own spiritual journey. If you talk about this in your book in Essential Spirituality a little bit, but your journey from Australia as a scientist to coming to the US and discovering various things that led you to this moment now.
Yeah, well, it's been a very surprising journey. I was certainly not expecting to end up interested in spirituality. As you implied, Eric, I came from Australia. I was a hardcore materialist scientist type. I got my MD and PhD at the University of Queensland, PhD doing neuroscience. And I thought after going through my specialty training in psychiatry, I would probably disappear back into a laboratory. But I was very fortunate in getting a Fulbright to come over to California to continue my studies at Stanford. California has a way of changing people. And I was no exception. And I found myself in this curious culture where a double curiosity of first being in California with this, in the 70s, this extraordinary array of cultures and mini cultures and worlds and practices and disciplines and you name it, it was there. Plus, I was in clinical psychiatry, and people were talking about curious things like getting in touch with feelings. I was like, I was a little bit, well, why would you want to do that? but I figured as a kind of as a moral obligation, since I was doing psychotherapy on people, I really had a moral obligation to try it for myself, and I had the extreme good fortune of going into therapy with truly a master therapist by the name of Jim Bugenthal, who was of a humanistic and existential orientation. And he was just masterful in giving feedback about what he was perceiving in his client's experience. And so he would, I would say something and he'd say, Roger, when you said that, it seemed like you pulled back and you contracted a bit, and it seemed like you hunched in a chair. And I'd say, what are you talking about? And then after a few months, it's like, oh yeah, you're right. Something did happen. And then a couple more months, it was like, oh yeah, I started to feel scared and I contracted and I did pull back. And so it was like being hooked up to a human biofeedback machine and having this incredible feedback about very subtle changes in behavior and experience. And it really tuned me into the subjective world of inner experience, which I had been totally out of touch with. And I was just astounded to find there was this inner universe of thoughts and images and fantasies and feelings that I'd been almost entirely cut off from. I felt like I had spent my entire life living on the top 6 inches of a wave on top of an ocean I didn't even know existed. And I was just astounded to find this inner universe was as vast and mysterious as the outer, that it was a reservoir of information and wisdom and resources and capacities, which if we turn attention inward and bring awareness to the mind and its and experience, tend to flower. And so I was just absolutely blown away to find that one could first off access one's inner experience, that it could be a source of guidance and wisdom and uh, insight, profound insight, and that was possible through paying attention to one's experience, that the mind tended to be, if one brought awareness to the mind, it tended to be, and I'll back up and say, I realized I'd spent my life being afraid of my own mind and what was in there. And I'd spent my life effectively shutting myself down so as not to open myself to what I feared was inside. And I came to realize that that's the way most people live. And it's really one of the greatest tragedies of life, that most people live in fear of their own minds. And that is a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. And so I found that when we bring awareness to our experience, to the mind turns out not to be frightening, but to be an incredible resource. And that I came to think of the mind, the way we're afraid of it, kind of like the analogy I use is is an old faucet that hasn't been opened in years. And when you first turn the tap on, what comes up is this rusty, gunky water, and the immediate response is to close it down, to turn it off. Yet if you let the tap and the pipe run, eventually it clears out and delivers this pure, clear, life-giving water. And so it is with our minds. We live in fear of our minds, and so we suppress and repress anything that is remotely fearful or uncomfortable. But there are two things about the nature of the mind it's really crucial to know. One is that what you're unwilling to experience sticks around in the mind until you are willing to experience it. And second, what you're unwilling to experience runs your life. And so this enormous tragedy that so many people, so many of us, live our lives afraid of our own minds. But one of the many, many beautiful discoveries was that when we open to our minds, when we turn attention inward and we let it rest there and sustain it there, the mind turns out to be self-correcting, self-healing, self-actualizing, self-transcending, and self-awakening. And it has these innate capacities to grow and to heal and to awaken if we simply give it the attention it requires. So that was my journey in psychotherapy, and it really just absolutely blew me out of the water. I just had no idea what I was getting into, and my life was radically changed. So after that, or towards the end of it, I started looking for other practices and ways of exploring the psyche, our minds, our potentials. And to my great surprise, I began to find myself in religious, spiritual groups, which utterly amazed me. Started doing meditation and yoga and chanting and so forth. I didn't understand why, because I assumed that religion was the opiate of the masses, and these were antiquated residuals of primitive thinking, and yet they seemed to be helpful. And I wrestled with this for months and months. And there was literally one moment as I was walking across the living room where I realized that at the heart of the great religious traditions hidden behind the institutions which often, not always, but often center more on faith and ritual than on direct contemplative practices. And again, I emphasize that's not always true, but for many conventional churches it is. But underneath that, or behind the conventions, are these so-called trans-conventional practices, which center on a psychotechnology, a spiritual psychotechnology for training the mind to induce the same states of mind and realizations and capacities and virtues that the founders discovered. And that just changed my life. And with that, I began a pretty intense and systematic exploration of the world's contemplative practices, and spent a number of years in retreat and doing full-time meditation and yoga and so forth, and just trying to understand and benefit from these extraordinary resources that are available to us, but until recently in the West have not been widely recognized or honored. In fact, we have a history of conventional religion has had a history of being very wary of contemplatives and mystics. That, of course, is changing in our own time quite dramatically as meditation and yoga and Christian contemplation and Jewish Kabbalah and zikr, Sufi zikr, et cetera, begin to become a little more mainstream in the West. So things are changing, and I think my own journey is a kind of reflection of that, of the way, of the kind of understanding that emerges as we open to these explorations.
Thank you. And was that over 4 or 5? You said you engaged with a therapist and then you began to study and practice. Was that transformation a fairly short few years, or I mean, it probably continues to this day, but
yeah, I'm a work in progress.
okay, all right.
But there were various phases, and the psychotherapy I went into was very intense. It started at twice a week and ended up at 4 times a week, and which is very rare these days. So it was very intense with a very good therapist, and was over 20 months. So a lot happened in a relatively brief time. And then the contemplative, then there was a phase of exploring the kind of many workshops and that are available in California. You name it, S to Rika, TA, TM. I did them all, you name it. I spent a year practically every weekend in a workshop of some kind or other. And then there was a gradual exploration of spiritual practices. At first, as I said, not understanding what they were for, and putting my toe in the water. And that was over a period of probably a couple of years. And I'd say after about 3 years, there was this sudden insight and understanding of what they were about.
Okay.
And after that, I dove in pretty intensely.
In my studies, I've sometimes come across some core teachings that seem essential as well, and I think you allude to them in your book as well, around ethics, concentration or stability of mind, and wisdom training. And I'm wondering if you could say a bit about, I mean, those could be almost like 3 legs of a stool. Is it a shaky stool? If you pull one of those legs out, is it hard to really have an integrative, healthy practice of ethics and concentration, stability of mind at some level, and then the wisdom training is not there?
Well, it's interesting you select those 3, Eric, because it was hearing Ram Dass state that those 3 trainings were core to spiritual practice that just opened things up for me. I can still remember to this day, I was listening to a tape recorder, which they had in cars in those days. and I can still remember exactly where I was on the road as I heard Ram Dass say, spiritual practices have three elements. They have a foundation in ethics, they have training for stabilizing the mind, and they aim for wisdom. And so that was exactly what you said, Eric, was a real opener for me. And but over time, I began to realize that, well, actually, it seems like there are additional practices which are widely recognized. So I began, as you know, I was always curious about I guess one of the key questions for me was, well, what are the greatest minds and hearts and sages and saints said are the essential qualities of heart and mind that are key to living wisely and well and awakening. And as I looked across traditions, I gradually began to see more. And so, before going to those, maybe to respond to your question, do these qualities require each other? There's a general idea across traditions that they do, that they are complementary.
Mm.
That and there's a term from the ancient Greek Stoics, antilokuthea, which essentially is close to complementarity, but it suggests that each of the major virtues both strengthens and complements and cultivates other virtues, so that they work together. And yes, you're right. I'm sure probably most people here have been meditation practitioners, and we all know that it's really hard to have a nice, quiet, relaxing meditation if you've been angry and yelling at people during the day. You know? And what comes up for review is any way you've been unkind or, or haven't been ethical. Those are the things which have emotional charge for us, as well as ethical charge, of course. But fortunately, having, for example, wisdom allows us to see the damage that being unethical does, and being ethical helps calm the mind, which allows it to be more stable. And the more stable the mind is, the more penetratingly we can see into it and into our experience and notice, instead of catching ourselves after we've blurted out something angry at someone, catch ourselves as the feeling of anger arises. Yeah, I think you said it well. It's a shaky stool without any of these, but there are also others. But I think you've hit a key point there, that about the complementarity of these qualities of heart mind.
I don't know if you speak to it directly in your writings, but some of the exercises I kind of turn this way, but some traditions talk about analytical meditation or self-inquiry. I found that a lot of people that practice meditation in the West, they move into the stability training and don't go too far into the insight, really getting insight to what's happening in the mind. But are there inquiry methods that you work with to kind of go more deeply into the content of the mind as it arises, or am I off the track there?
No, I think you're right on, Eric. I think you're pointing to one of the most widely recognized distinctions between different kinds of meditations. The concentrative on the one hand, and the sometimes called awareness or analytic practices on the other. Concentration practices attempt to hold attention on a fixed object, such as the breath or a sound, a mantra, or a particular object. And it's a way of training attention, and it does stabilize the mind. The mind is one of the first things you learn when you take up meditation is, whoa, my mind has a mind of its own. I'm not really, it's amazing how little control I have over this thing. I think that is as for me, was one of the greatest shocks of my life, to realize that how little control I had over my own mind, and that it just, you know, acted the way it did. And it really, but it was also incredible discovery to find that one could train the mind.
Mm.
And that's what contemplative practices do. They train the mind, and metaphorically, they train the heart in terms of cultivating specific beneficial emotions, and they train the will, cultivating specific beneficial motives. So um, uh, these concentration practices provide the stability for doing some of this inner work. But as you point to, there are whole families of other practices which either, we can break them down into another two. You mentioned analytic meditation, which has a couple of different meanings, but can refer to analyzing experience in very systematic ways, or simple awareness practices, of which the best known in the West is the Buddhist insight or Vipassana meditation. And there one often begins with a few minutes of concentration practice on the breath to calm and settle. But then, instead of just remaining fixed on the breath, as different experiences arise and as they pull attention, one simply investigates or explores whatever attention is drawn to as sensitively and clearly as one can, with the idea of developing insight or understanding into the nature of one's experience, the way the mind works, its capacities, its potentials, the pathologies that may be operating. So, and the beauty of the awareness practice is that all one has to do, one discovers, is hold awareness, to allow experiences to emerge and unfold by themselves. And at first, it's an effort to, to hold attention on them, but with practice, and to emphasize these are all practices, one finds that experiences just unfold in beneficial ways of themselves. So it's a beautiful discovery that, again, we can trust our minds. And if we simply bring awareness to them in a meditative way, for example, or a therapeutic way, or yogic or contemplative, that the mind will heal and actualize and mature.
Well, I'll open this up to questions just a minute. I had one more question to kind of probe a little deeper on that theme. I'm curious if you might share anything in your own personal practice in the process of looking at the mind with awareness, insights that arise, and maybe they're deep insights, and then maybe at the root of it you go, oh, it's nothing. Maybe I don't know what you discover. Sometimes it's a deep insight, but then sometimes you discover it's mind made. So I'm just curious, that insight process, if there's things that you've encountered that have supported your practice or enlivened your life, or
Well, I think that fortunately there have been so many of them. I feel very grateful that it's been 40 years of practice now, that there's been a recurrent opening of insight into, as there is, into one's experience, into life. And there tends to be a pattern of those insights. It starts with often just seeing the various habits we have, and the habits of mind and of behavior, of course, because our behavior is mind expressed. And one sees, oh, when someone says that, I do this. Or when things don't go the way I think they should. I react this way, and one just sees these patterns, and then after a while, one sees beneath that, oh, when someone says that, I do this because this fear arises, or I become competitive or jealous or something. And then at a still deeper level, when there might be a realization of, oh, wait on, I get scared when people do that, but there's really no need to. I don't have to be afraid of that. And these insights usually have to be repeated a number of times, each time weakening the lifetime of conditioning. And maybe beyond that, there's the recognition, oh, wait a minute. I really don't have to be scared of anything. I mean, fear doesn't add. Do I need fear to not step in front of a bus? Do I need guilt? And one sees with guilt, for example, that it probably served a function as a kid, but as an adult who's trying to do the right thing, does it help in any way, or is it just destructive? And so there may be a recognition, well, wait a minute, guilt just seems like there's regret, which can be very healthy. Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I hurt John or Sally. Okay, how can I remedy it? But guilt is regret plus self-attack. And self-attack is just destructive. So, okay, so maybe I don't need guilt to keep myself in line. Maybe I don't need guilt at all. In fact, maybe I can, if I look carefully enough and just see the things that hook me into feeling guilt, over time, the reactivity just dissolves or distinctly lessens, to really dissolve completely a lifetime of conditioning about anything is usually a lengthy process, but sometimes things drop away very quickly.
That's very helpful. I think I'll read a little poem here, and then we'll open up to questions. Your statement
Beautiful,
there.
Yeah.
It seems like it relates. It's titled Self-Observation Without Judgment by Donna Falls. Release the harsh and pointed inner voice. It's just a throwback to the past and holds no truth about this moment. Let go of self-judgment, the old learned ways of beating yourself up for each imagined inadequacy. Allow the dialogue within the mind to grow friendlier and quiet. Shift out of inner criticism, and life suddenly looks very different. I can say this only because I make the choice 100 times a day to release the voice that refuses to acknowledge the real me. What's needed here isn't more prodding towards perfection, but intimacy, seeing clearly and embracing what I see. Love, not judgment, sows the seeds of tranquility and change. Love, not judgment, sows the seeds of tranquility and change.
Beautiful. Yeah. And just to take off on that for a moment, Eric, that last line just really struck me because we do tend to believe that we have to goad and punish ourselves to change and condemn ourselves, judge in the sense of condemnation. And yet one of the great discoveries of inner exploration, of contemplative practice of any kind, is that condemnation in general, but self-condemnation is destructive, and it keeps old ways of dysfunctional patterns going. And as Carl Jung, a great psychologist, said, the acid test of personality is acceptance. Acceptance in the sense of not accepting the suffering of the world just, okay, that's great. Yeah, but removing condemnation,
Hmm.
uh, particularly on oneself, but also on others, which again does not mean giving them a pass. There's a very major difference between a condemnation, a righteous condemnation, and a wise discerning. That doesn't work. We can't allow you to continue that. So, yeah, very beautiful poem. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm going to pause since I've been dominating here in the question side, and thought I would open it up to the group, and you can maybe turn your videos on if you haven't, so we can see you. That would be
Oops.
okay. Oh, we can't do that. Okay. Right. Well, just unmute yourself and fire away.
I have a question. You mentioned that, and I can't quote you because I can't quote you. But you mentioned something that if somebody engages in these practices, these contemplative practices, eventually, the mind opens and there's a change, there's a shift. I think you said something to this extent.
Mhm.
Does that always happen?
Let's see. I would say when one brings awareness to one's experience, to the mind, it does catalyze change. And of course, the kind of change and the degree of change vary depending on the experience and the conditioning and so forth. But it does seem that if you look across the world's contemplative traditions, these contemplative practices at the heart of the great religions, and across psychotherapies, you find that one of the common denominators is bringing awareness to one's experience and to the mind. Whether we're doing it in psychotherapy with the aid of a therapist, or doing it sitting on a cushion, or doing a Christian contemplation, bringing awareness to our experience fosters, allows, catalyzes the release of harmful dysfunctional patterns, whether they're emotions such as anger, fear, or jealousy, or motives such as greed, for example. And the beauty of awareness is it not only tends to release negative patterns, destructive patterns, but it tends to foster positive qualities. And for example, bringing away in, say, the Buddhist psychology, there's the idea that mindfulness, bringing precise awareness to experience, tends to cultivate a variety of positive qualities, including the ones Eric mentioned, concentration and stability and calm and wisdom, for example. So I would say yes, anytime we do bring awareness to our experience in our minds, there is change. Of course, it may be subtle, it may take a while before we notice significant change, but I understand. But as you become more, as your contemplative practice deepens and you become more sensitive, you begin to see at a micro level the way in which experience is always changing, and that bringing awareness to it fosters that continual change to move in positive directions.
Thank you. Was there a question from Jack? Did I see? No. But I saw a mic go off there. No. Any other questions?
No questions, but I thank you for your sharing immensely.
Great.
Yes, thanks, Eric.
Bruce, what a
you're right.
delight. Oh, I haven't seen you in probably 15 years either, or maybe a little less.
Well, when Francis passed, that was,
Yeah.
but in any event, thank you for writing your book, Essential Spirituality. And in that book, you talk about levels of consciousness. Could you share something about levels of consciousness and especially elaborate a little bit on non-dualism, the non-dual state?
Okay, let's see. Well, you're asking the big, big questions, of course. But let's see. One of the, you're giving an invitation to a big topic here, Bruce. So maybe we can step back a little and say that one of the things there's a new possibility that's emerging in spiritual practice. The world's contemplative traditions have been masters of cultivating states of mind. Christian contemplation, Sufi zikr, Taoist yoga, whatever. What you look and you find that at the heart of each of the great religions, they have contemplative practices which induce specific states of mind, and these states of mind tend to emerge, as you're suggesting, in a sequence. It's not a fixed sequence, but they tend to emerge in a sequence. And first set of experiences that emerge, states of mind that tend to emerge, tend to be ones of increasing sensitivity and subtlety. When one is able, as one mind stabilizes and clears, and one just sees more sensitively. So the states of mind that emerge tend to be subtle, and one becomes aware of the mind creations. The traditional description of subtle states are dreams. Dream states are these mind-manufactured worlds that we create and live in each night, which we take for reality. But we also have waking dreams, and we tend to get lost into them. One of the things contemplative practices do is wake us up from our waking dreams. So beyond that, at a certain point, awareness the mind may become so clear and calm that these experiences tend to drop away, and one becomes increasingly aware of awareness or consciousness or spirit itself. And those are variously named. For example, as some most common one reads these days is as causal states, meaning these are the states of pure awareness, which from which experience arises. And then beyond that, as you're pointing out, there's the possibility of, and I should say that there is the possibility at this stage of pure awareness of recognizing, oh, I spent my entire life suffering from a case of mistaken identity. I thought I was these mental contents. I thought I was scared. I thought I was smart. I thought I was all these ideas. I thought that I was this story in my head. But at this stage of pure awareness, one recognizes, wait a minute, awareness is, I've just been identifying with mental contents and processes and mistaking myself for them. Actually, at a deeper level, what I experience myself as is pure awareness or spirit. And then there's a possibility beyond that, which you pointed to, Bruce, which is that as one experiences oneself as spirit or awareness or consciousness, or there are lots of different names for it, experiences can arise again, but instead of getting lost into them, as we have spent a lifetime doing, there's a possibility of recognizing that all our experiences are expressions of spirit. They are non-dual, they're not separate from spirit. So world and spirit are now recognized as, oh, they're actually not separate. There's not, the sacred is in the mundane. And I should mention also, since you raised this point, Bruce, the word non-dual has gotten very popular these days, and it's thrown around a lot. And what I've described is the way it was classically described, but these days it's sometimes also used for the experience in which one's sense of being a separate self or ego disappears, and one recognizes that, oh, what I've spent my lifetime identifying with a mental self-representation. It's very interesting. We look at the words, my self-image, or myself something, or myself this, and my self-story, my self-narrative, myself. It's like, well, wait a minute. Who is it that has this story, or this image, or this self-image, and it's interesting how much is actually in the words, because we've been identifying not with our true nature, but with an image of what we are. We've been identifying not with our true identity, but with a self-concept, an idea about who we are. And in these experiences, states of pure awareness, and of non-duality, those old ideas about who and what we are just are recognized as, wow, I was living in mental construction. I was assuming that I was a story that I made up. I was assuming I was this idea. I was assuming I was this image or fantasy. It's like, whoa. I think one of the, and I notice you're nodding from your own experience. So you know this. I think this is for me, and I'd be interested to hear your comment, Bruce. This is one of the great shocks of my life, to realize that I and most of us have spent our lives suffering from a case of mistaken identity. Sounds like that resonates for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I think about it also in terms of in the sense of awakened awareness, of being awakened to the true nature, which is a loving state, at the same time being in this space. And so that I think of non-dual as being aware of something that is immediate, translucent, light, unbounded, at the same time being able to see, the limitations within at least this physical universe. And so I think it's a both and.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I know you've done some deep practice with people like Dan Brown and Richard Miller, founder of iRest. So you've done these practices and had these experiences. So you speak from direct experience, which is beautiful. There's such a difference from just hearing these things secondhand, so-called knowledge by description, as opposed to direct knowledge by acquaintance. That one really, for these things to really impact, it has to come from one's own direct experience, as you're describing. Yeah.
Something that makes me think about is that, what is the implication of this place where we are less attached to our own beliefs, perspectives, our personality, and see that is largely a construct. So we're resting more in this open, spacious awareness. I would say that often Bruce mentioned love, compassion arises. One might say, how does one act from that place if there's not, the personality's preferences of likes and dislikes? You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I think that's always a challenge for our mental mind to say, well, who's the actor inside here that's going to work for justice, to support compassion in the world?
Yeah, and one can give a conceptual answer to that. But Bruce, you were talking directly from your experience. I'd love to hear what shifted from you as that identity has become more real for you.
Well, yeah, so it's fleeting, but for me, the experience is going is a process of emptiness, empty of thought, emotion, self, of time. And it's the other side of emptiness, where awakened awareness or the sea of love is, that in a non-dual sense can also enable me to be in the world. And again, as I say, it's fleeting. And so for me, it takes concentrated practice to be able to get to that space. Because I find myself doing whatever I do in my daily life is kind of a distraction from that. But I do have these touch points on a daily basis where, I do my meditation practice, but it's an echo of what that sustained state is.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think you're describing one of the major stages of contemplative practice, which is stabilization. And one can look at the world's contemplative traditions and see they have three kinds of map. The first kind of map describes the changes that we undergo from when we first begin practice to when we gain some of the insights you're describing, Bruce. But as you're describing, those experiences, those states of mind at first are quite fleeting. They are what Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, called peak experiences. They're just little peaks, but they're not enduring plateau experiences. So the next stage of practice and the next set of maps that describe the sequence of contemplative practices concern stabilization. That is, yeah, it's great to have an experience of deep insight. It's great to have moments of feeling just untrammeled joy or pure love or completely open-hearted compassion. That's absolutely exquisite, and that they change us. They do shift our conditioning. But the world's contemplatives suggest that that's a great beginning, but it's not the end, and that the next practice challenge is exactly as you were implying, Bruce. It's to stabilize those so they become so that we transform peak experiences into plateau experiences, altered states into altered traits, epiphanies into personality, or transform flashes of illumination into abiding light. In each case, the idea becomes that these beautiful ways of being, which are tastes of our true nature, gradually become enduring ways of being. And as the great Christian writer Evelyn Underhill said, the unitive experience becomes a unitive life. And that's the aspiration, and that's where the great saints and sages live, basically.
Other questions? I would just share a little bit from my own personal practice. Something that's beginning to arise for me a bit more is I almost see the world sometimes as, I don't know, for lack of a better term, two narratives. I see the world in front of me that involves my mind, my concepts, and all that, the play of life. And when I see myself getting pulled into that in kind of a way where I'm struggling with it, with that reality, and trying to put myself in the middle of it and controlling it, I just back up a little bit and I look at a horizon above that narrative. I just kind of see it as a play in front of me. I look above that play and there's a clear sky there. And it's awareness. And just noticing awareness in that moment, it gives space to be with that complexity and seeming sometimes chaos of the world to a place where I can then respond in a clear way. I haven't made the connection too much between that awareness and then responding. Oftentimes I just kind of bump up into the awareness and let the play down below, the chaos of the world, kind of let it go. And but that's kind of where I'm at. And how do I begin to integrate that larger awareness with action is kind of where I'm at in my own practice.
Yeah, beautiful. So you have a taste of what's possible, and the implication of what you're saying is that yes, each time when you're able to open into that vast awareness within which everything arises, then one becomes a little less lost into, a little less run by all the mental machinations which we usually identify with and are run by. So there's just a little each time. It's like there's a little, oh, okay. Oh yeah, now I remember. And there's a little deconditioning that goes on, and just a little less reactivity. And it's a practice. That's why we do these things. We're all works in progress.
For sure. Any other questions, comments? Any comments?
Yeah, anyone like to share some of their own experience? Everyone here, I'm sure, is a practitioner of some kind. Be beautiful to hear about people's experience.
Well, I could share.
Please.
The clarity and the honesty and the depth of what you have shared are just, like, spring air, just opening into that. What you were describing is marvelous.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. So, and it says a lot about the inner work that you've done, that simply hearing this is enough to give you a taste of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
G? G?
Okay, I have one more question. When one comes to peace with reality, with what is, and one begins to understand that nothing has happened to them, that it's just life unfolding. It's not personal. You can tell that I'm thinking as I'm talking. I should be thinking first and then talking, but I don't have the time for that.
Go. Let us in on the thinking process.
Okay, so as one becomes at peace with all that is, where does one reach for motivation and inspiration to also change what is?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, beautiful question. Thank you. Beautiful comment. And there's an exquisite paradox that I suspect many of you have worked with the Course in Miracles, which is an unorthodox but exquisite Christian spiritual teaching and practice. And it has a big section on titled "I Need Do Nothing." And that can be understood at many levels, but at the level I think you're referring to, there's a growing recognition as one enters into and tastes that level of awareness that Eric was pointing to, or the field of open field that Bruce was describing, of a growing trust in oneself. And what one finds is that one moves increasingly from a place of ego-driven motivation to an increasing trust in our nature. And there's a process here which is recognized across multiple traditions. Perhaps the best known is the Chinese description of what's called Wu Wei, which means not action without action. And it's an experience of spontaneity. In fact, Tibetan Buddhist Dzogchen calls it spontaneity. And the great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart spoke of reaching a place of living without why. And there's a beautiful quote by the British teacher whose name I'm forgetting. All of us know him, but he was kind of Supreme Self. He wrote the book, The Supreme Self. Anyway, he said, a person at this stage trusts their own nature, which is nature itself. And there's the experience of the universe simply acts through one. And one is able simply to open to it all and trust that not only will one respond, but that the response will be optimally skillful. It will be wise. It will be trustworthy. And it's as I was implying, this is described across multiple traditions, and it's a beautiful experience. You know, I can say I've tasted it, of course, have not stabilized it, but it is a beautiful experience to feel that, oh, yes, I can trust that God or your universe or nature will act through me in a way which is appropriate if I open to my true nature, our true nature. Yeah, it's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful issue.
So does then the question why become a distraction or a cop out for paralysis, inaction, or just confusion?
You mean why act?
Yeah, why am I doing this? Why now? Why this? Why? Yeah.
I would say it depends on the stage of maturity of a person. I think for most of us, it can be very skillful to look at, okay, what's my motivation? Why am I doing this? I think that's a very skillful practice for most of us. And what the great sages and saints describe is there's a place at which, a point at which that can drop away, and one can simply trust that that what is appropriate will occur spontaneously through one. So I think it's as with so many things, the answer depends on the stage of one's maturation. But certainly, I think your implication is that asking why can be a valuable, and yeah, it is. It can be a valuable, very valuable practice. When done skillfully, it can, of course, fall into a kind of obsessive worrying about, am I doing this right? Am I, what am I? And, and do I have, and if one takes up a practice, it becomes, is my practice pure? Is my motive pure? Am I doing it for the right reason? It was a wonderful, relieving moment for me when I was in a long retreat once, and I walked past Jack Cornfield, a very well-known Buddhist teacher, who was talking to another retreatant and said, motivation's always mixed. And I realized I'd spent years worrying about whether my motivation was pure or mixed. And of course it's not pure. Of course it's mixed, Maybe in another decade or so, we'll get more and more pure. But right now I can just assume it's mixed. And so it's good for me to ask the question why, but not to obsess about it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Fair enough, and thank you so much.
Judy has her hands up. Do you have a question, Judy?
Yes, I'd like to share that I'm glad that you're with us, Roger, and that we could hear you in person on Zoom. So thank you for being with us. And Eric, last Sunday, your talk on the book Essential Spirituality introduced us to Roger's principles. And I borrowed the book from the library today. So I'm looking forward, Roger, to learning more about what you're believing in and what you are teaching us about. Thank you.
Well, bless you. How to make an author happy. Yeah, what about your own experience, Judy? Is there something here that you would rings with your own experience?
Yes, that as I grow older, I realize how much I need to relax and take in what I can and give what I can. And as the theme of our church is for this coming year, love, give love, and be open to receiving love.
Beautiful. Was it Saint Augustine who said, "Love and do as thou wilt"? Love and do whatever you want as long as you do it with love. Love. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Well, yes, Ken. Or Bruce. I see your hand up, maybe, yeah.
So, Roger, being in California, you're probably on ground zero with this question. There's a lot coming on recently about the use of psychedelics and awakened processes, and I have my own personal trepidation about that, but I know a lot of people have some very positive experience with that. Could you actually talk a little bit about psychedelics and the pros and cons, the cautions, kind of the state of the field?
Yeah, well, thank you, Bruce. It's a very timely question because there has been a so-called psychedelic renaissance, which is quite powerful, and yes, particularly powerful in California, probably. And I think you voiced a nice balance there between curiosity and appreciation that some people benefit enormously, and that these are incredibly powerful substances and have to be treated with great respect. And traditionally, they've been widely used across the world in multiple cultures. And almost all, I do not know of a single exception in traditional culture where psychedelics were not viewed as sacred substances and used sacramentally. So, which tells us a lot about skillful ways of working with these things, treat them with great respect as being potentially, as they're often called, not only psychedelic, that is revealing the mind, but entheogenic, that is opening us to the divine within. And certainly they have that potential. And there's no question that for some people on some occasions, they can be very revelatory and very opening and very healing. We have a lot of solid research on that now, fortunately. And for people who are not adequately prepared, who take them under, at a party or something like that with no precautions, without a guide, without a sitter, without appropriate instructions, etc., they can be very problematic. And I've treated people on locked wards who've used these things stupidly and have suffered consequently. And there are some people, such as those who have a history of psychotic breaks, who have had a history of, for example, manic depressive disorder, bipolar, or schizophrenia, who just should never be using these substances. Perhaps the most skillful way, as I understand it, came from a little research study I did some years back. I was really interested to know what spiritual teachers themselves thought about these substances. So I managed to find 5 teachers who had used psychedelics and had profound openings with them, and had also had profound openings in their own spiritual tradition. And so we're able to make some comparisons. And it was interesting. There was unanimity across them. All of them said, these can be very valuable substances if used skillfully in the context of a spiritual practice. They do not constitute a path by themselves, but they can, if used wisely in the context of a spiritual practice and path, be aids to that path. I thought that was a pretty good summary. Yeah. Does that kind of fit with your take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good that you touched on that. I've got one other question, if I can change the subject. So, all right. All right.
Yeah.
You know, there's a state called equanimity. Could you talk a little bit about what equanimity is, and especially how it's being used, for instance, in some areas with end of life care, and with the real benefit of empathy versus sympathy is, and moving into action through compassion into equanimity. So talk a little bit about that for audience. I think it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, well said. It is. And so maybe we should start with a definition. Equanimity is a mental capacity, and it's the capacity for remaining unperturbed when faced with provocative, challenging stimuli and situations. And it's a capacity it's a capacity for remaining, having mental stability, ideally calm and clarity, but not maintaining them by suppressing emotions or pushing experiences away, but by opening to them in a non-defended way. But it's really important to know that equanimity, like peace or like concentration or wisdom, is a skill, and it's cultivated over time. And from your own experience, Bruce, you described a few minutes ago experiences of greater calm and equanimity and openness and vastness and emptiness, etc., which I would assume have a taste of equanimity for you. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, it's a way of navigating a challenging situation and engaging.
Yeah. And that came to you through a lot of work. I mean, I know you've done a lot of practices, you've retreated, you've done a lot. You've explored as many things as almost anyone I know. So I think we could say you're reaping the rewards of all your work and exploration, which goes along with the idea that, yes, equanimity is a beautiful capacity, but it is a skill. And you also pointed to another facet of it that, I think you've done more work with the death and dying than I have, but my understanding is that, for example, from Kubler-Ross's stages, that people tend to, ideally, they cut after the phase of denial and anger and bargaining and so forth, they do ideally tend to come to a place of equanimity in which there is an acceptance of mortality and somehow a kind of transpersonal equanimity. And it can also come with age, just by aging, this phenomenon called gerotranscendence. That is, as people age, they tend to become more open to the transpersonal, to the bigger picture, to being concerned about future generations, moving beyond egocentricity. So, and that I think is also associated with equanimity. So I want to qualify what I said before, that equanimity is a skill one develops, but it also seems to be a capacity that can occur with maturation and with approaching death itself. That's my understanding. Maybe people have more experience with direct work with the dying. But anyway, yeah, that's my understanding.
She
Thank
has
you.
her hand up, and I think this is going to be our last question because it's almost 8:30.
Darby, wow, what a pleasure.
Roger, wonderful to see you.
Yes, what a delight.
And speaking of aging, you have not aged 1 minute since I
Oh,
see
good. The lighting is doing its work.
you. It's great. I mainly wanted to get on to just thank you. When Eric started talking about exploring essential spirituality in great detail over the course of this church year, and your name was brought up, I just thought, wow, what a tremendous gift it would be for you to be with us. And here you are. And yeah, I don't think, well, I had the luxury of spending time with your beloved wife, may she rest in peace, Frances. I remember having a lunch with her in particular. I don't think you and I have spent that much time together, just seeing each other, in the course of Fetzer events over the years. But what a beautiful, rich evening you provided us tonight. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you. As you know, it's a delight to explore and share these kind of explorations. So thank you so much. And yeah, we haven't spent a lot of time, but I remember thinking of you fondly, and it's nice to have this chance of a few minutes now. And well, it's been like old home week. Get to see Eric, get to see Bruce. This is great.
We'll meet up at the coffee house next week in Denver or something, someplace in the middle. Well, thank you so much, Roger. It's been a real gift to have you with us in our community tonight and sharing with all of us, fielding our questions and supporting us on our spiritual journeys. It's just a real privilege to have you with us. And I know we have a closing slide about our next Thoughtful Thursday, if everyone can stay on, and then I'll close with a reading and we'll be done and you can do what you're with the rest of your evening. So to help us continue to lend this voice of love and justice in the world, we have a little URL here, tinyurl.com, donate to UUCC. If you want to take your camera out, your phone out, you can take a picture of that, or you can send a check to UUCC, and that helps us keep these programs going. So we always appreciate anything that you can give. And then our Thoughtful Thursday. So our next Thoughtful Thursday will be September 19, and it will be Engaging Faith Communities in Climate Action. And Molly will be with us from Hope for Creation. She's the executive director There'll be information on that. Again, there's a tiny URL that you can use there to register for the event. And know that anytime that you register for these events, if you can't make it to the live talk, you will receive a link to the YouTube recording that allows you to then see it at another time that's convenient for you. And I think that's the last slide. And here's my closing reading. This is, I think, a Rumi poem. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make sense anymore. Thank you for being here with us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.